Well put. Well
Yeah.
said. Well
Yeah.
said. And people come to Tome for that reason. Every month I sit down with all of our new hires from the previous month or so, and just ask them why they're here. Where are they coming from? What did they hear about Tome before they got here? And then for the weeks that they've been here, have we lived up to that expectation? And really, since our second year in existence, and we're now in our third. So for the last year and a half, almost 2 years, um, people come here not just for the breakthrough technology, but they come here because somebody they know works here, or somebody they know knows somebody they know who works here, and they talk about how wonderful it is to work here. Our people are helpful, genuine, collaborative, um, and that these are things that many, many companies talk about. But even just through interviewing, they really felt it. And the most gratifying is that when they're several weeks in, they're like, "Yeah, it absolutely lived up to the hype. I was skeptical, but it absolutely has lived up to that reputation." Um, and so that's why I know even though we're 150 people now, we're still doing something right. And I think it really just us as leadership showing up as transparent um, and genuine.
Yeah. I like your reflections on the value of struggle. And I want to shift gears here a little bit and talk about some of this groundbreaking technology, because like the value of the struggle is on full display in cell and gene therapy right now, right? Like everyone knows that the struggle is it's a valiant struggle. The last time you and I talked a few weeks ago, you talked a little bit about inflection points, and I think you mentioned that like we're approaching one, maybe not maybe not on the precipice, but approaching an inflection point right now. So I guess frame up for us like what is the struggle, the technical or scientific struggle that your company is in lockstep addressing right now, and perhaps what are some of the holdups around uh, declaring victory in the struggle?
Yeah. I was actually just having this conversation with John Finn, our CSO, this morning. There are a series of struggles that we will face over the coming years. The first one, to answer your question, is proving that this DNA editing technology is worth anything. And what I mean by that is it's not novel technology, with all due respect to academic scientists, is not important.
Mm.
It really isn't, unless it underlies and underwrites a drug that will help a patient in a way that they cannot be helped with any existing technology. I don't frankly care, and this is again the physician and the physician and non-scientist in me. Um, I don't care what the mechanism of editing a piece of DNA is. I really don't. What I care about is whether that mechanism can lead to a drug that's going to help someone in a way that no other editing technology, no biologic, no small molecule, no RNAi ever could. And that's why I get somewhat frustrated when I see so many companies going after so many of the same drug targets. To me, that means that your editing technology, no matter what you say, isn't actually all that interesting, because
Mm.
it's only interesting if a patient will benefit. Um, and so for us, I think our first struggle that we've overcome is actually identifying a list of targets, a list of diseases that really we're addressing in a way that nobody else can. That was struggle one. That's behind us, and we'd love to talk about that more as we get to the second half of this year. And we start talking about our pipeline more openly. Um, the second is really proving that the technology can work as a drug development platform, right? Because when it comes out of MIT, it's a paper and it's some plasmids and it works in a dish, and maybe it seems to work a little bit in early mouse studies. That's all been published. It's all public domain. What we need to do is industrialize it, and industrialize it in a way that with a speed and a cost, it can actually start creating these drugs in a bona fide manner. We don't ask those questions of protein engineering techniques. We know they work. They've been working for decades.
Yeah.
Uh, but you don't always know that about a new DNA editing technique. And so that is where we are now. And as a preview of data that we will be showing at the end of this year, towards the second half of this year, excuse me, and into 2025, we are at the point where the data that I'm seeing, I have no doubt that programmable genomic integration is a bona fide drug development platform. And frankly, as I see what we're achieving in the preclinical world, it's hard for me not to look at other DNA editing technologies as somewhat obsolete at this point. And I'm incredibly excited for where we're going. Our next struggle, quite frankly, there's a struggle I'll talk about in a minute. The ultimate struggle then is going to be going into the clinic and showing that what we're doing in animal models, we can actually do in patients for their benefit. I mean, that's sort of an obvious one. Right. But there is an intermediate struggle, and that is an intermediate struggle between where we are now and where will we be then in the clinic that is unique to our time. And that is the risk of capital. Expensive DNA editing platforms are out of favor in our industry right now for pharma, for investors. And so as we talk to investors and bankers, and people ask me a somewhat variant of the question you're asking, which is, what's the biggest risk in front of you? They're usually asking for a scientific answer. And I'll say, if you actually understand our data, you'll realize that we've discharged most of the technical risk. Not all, but most.
Yeah.
Our biggest risk is being able to raise enough money to keep doing what we're doing.
Is that softening at all? I mean, coming out of JPM, there was a lot of pomp and circumstance about biotech coming back and capital markets loosening up again. Or is there, specific to this niche, gene editing, is it still a pretty hard market to operate in?
No, I think it definitely is softening. These things run in cycles, and when I talk to when I talk to individuals who've seen more cycles than I have, so again, I go back to Brian quite a bit. Some bankers that have formed a very close relationship, and one particular banker who worked very closely with me on the Pandion sale, and they helped me think through what the phase of the cycle that we're in. Mm-hmm. It generally goes like this: during these periods of downturn, valuations become depressed, and large pharma comes in and starts buying things on the cheap. And when that starts happening, now the IPO window starts to open, and then that trickles back down to the private markets. We saw robust M&A right through the most difficult periods of private investing in our industry over the last couple of years. We're now starting to see IPOs move forward. Some do well, some do not. So thawing, I think you used the word thawing, is an excellent word for it. We're not liquid yet, but we are thawing.
I think I said softening, but that's akin to thawing.
I'll give you thawing, absolutely. Yeah. But I think it's thawing in two ways. It's thawing for clinical stage assets, which is where most of the M&A has been, frankly, and it's taking the really more visionary investors, the really forward-looking investors, to say, okay, I know I'm going to pull a Wayne Gretzky. I know where the puck is going. Mm-hmm. If everyone's focused on clinical stage, the next exuberance is going to be in preclinical. So I'm going to start investing there now. And so when we talk to investors, the interest we're getting are really from the more visionary investors and not the momentum investors who are still focused on clinical stage. So it's thawing, it's softening. It's going to take another several quarters for us to get to a place where there's true liquidity in not the capital sense, but liquidity in the investing markets, particularly the private investing markets.
Yeah. Yeah. From your purview as the leader at Tome, when you're looking at investment opportunities and entertaining an investor interest in your company, mm-hmm. How important is it for you to be discerning, right? Like, I've had several conversations with biotech execs who, we talk and finance folks, people who are in the investment community who talked about how the fact that we were, as an industry biotech was overcapitalized leading up to this crash, right? Like there was just too much money going into the wrong hands, going into the wrong programs. And unfortunately, a byproduct of that is some good programs getting, put on the back burner, shelved, going by the wayside.
Absolutely.
But as you sort of course correct away from that, in your corner of the world as leader of Tome, how important is it for you to be discerning about, like you mentioned, like, do I see differences in the momentum investors, and are they going to be a better bet for us long term than, perhaps the retail investors, for lack of a better term, that got us into a bunch of trouble a few years back?
I completely agree with the sentiment that we were overcapitalized when interest rates were effectively zero. And there was a lot of sort of there was investment that wasn't based on fundamental principles that was being done kind of in our jammies over Zoom.
Mm.
Um, Completely agree. And we're working through the ramifications of that overinvestment, to be sure. When I think about a company like Tome, however, we have very high capital requirements. We've actually recently done an analysis looking at our timeline to various inflection points that we were talking about before, the number of people it's taken us to get to each of those points, and the amount of capital burnt to get there.
Mhm.
We are the most efficient CRISPR-based company in history in terms of amount of capital it's taken us to get to certain inflection points in the preclinical world and the number of people it's taken us to get there. So we are doing our diligence of building a DNA editing company for this age and not the over exuberant age of a few years ago.
Yeah.
That being said, it's still an expensive business to run, and we will need investors of different backgrounds. We will need I was just having this conversation with an investor yesterday. We are going to need a diversified shareholder base to drive this forward. Traditional blue chip venture capitalists, crossover investors, sovereign wealth, and even retail at the right time. And so this idea of you're constructing your capitalization table with the right mix and the right diversified mix of investors who can invest over time is an art, but there's definitely an art to your capitalization table moving from certain phenotype of investor to certain phenotype of investor over time until eventually you're publicly traded.
Yeah.
And so this is just something that we think about as a you know, we 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 released we came out of stealth earlier this year. We released how much money we raised off of our A and our B round. And as we think about our next round, as a startup biotech, you're always thinking about your next round. We
Mhm.
do think, and I think a lot about what's the right makeup for this stage of the cap table on our path towards eventually one day becoming public.
Yeah. You talked about quite a bit earlier in the conversation. You talked about, a point in your career where you thought perhaps you wanted to go back to the venture capital. Do you feel like the role that you're in now, like operating with such intentionality around your capitalization structure moving forward, does it scratch a bit of that itch for you just personally? Like, do you feel like you're from some perspective still in the game?
What scratches that is actually my work with Polaris. So as an entrepreneur partner at Polaris, where I've been able to work actually with some of my existing investors on new companies as well. Not just helping the other partners at Polaris when they feel I can help them with evaluating a potential investment, but even working on one new company myself, where I'm a stealth company where I'm now on the board, and I am on the board of another company, Atralis, which is a company I've been on the board on for some period of time now, as an independent, well before my Polaris days. And so I scratched that itch through my board work, and particularly through my work through Polaris. I've found that the individuals at Polaris are exceptional human beings, really have their heart in the right place, share the same values that I do when it comes to building companies for the right reasons with the right philosophies. But it is a different viewpoint. It's a viewpoint of an investor, and so I do feel like that's incredibly valuable. I actually really appreciate that they let me work alongside them.
Yeah, very cool. We are running short on time. Can you believe how fast time is flying right now? I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I could keep you on the phone for another half an hour or so, but I don't want to do that. I want to be respectful of your time, but I do want to shift gears a little bit and get your perspective on this. I just because I've been thinking about it lately. I wrote a reflection recently on pharma in general's PR problem, right? And I'm curious about your take on, I mean, it was Nielsen data that
Yeah.
basically said the pharmaceutical industry is held in a lower regard than lawyers, airlines, the federal government. We're keeping some pretty rough company in terms of public perception. And public perception is patient perception, right? Like, we're working ultimately to serve the public. And I know that a lot of that reflection is rooted in, payer experiences, big pharma, but we can't pin it all on them. I'm curious about whether you have any opinions on the role that biotech could and should play, given the fact that like that's where the most exciting, most innovative, most patient-centric work is happening. Like I said, your opinions on the role that the biotech could or should play in sort of changing the PR paradigm of this industry.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely correct, and it's been correct for a very long time, that we are not well regarded. It's really interesting. Patients don't generally hate their doctors, and they don't generally hate the medicines they take, but they hold in very low esteem the companies that invent, design, develop, and launch those medicines. There's a bit of cognitive dissonance there, and I think you're right. There's a reason for it. I think, unfortunately, the pharma industry gets politicized. There are many, many more players in the pharmaceutical industry, insurance companies, PBMs, et cetera. Each has its own entrenched interest. It's incredibly convoluted. And what the public discourse has done, I don't fault anyone for this, is simplify that for the reading populace. You need a scapegoat. You need an enemy. And pharma has done itself no favors in the way it prices drugs and some of the scandals that have happened over the years. So I understand where it comes from.
Yeah.
To your question about can biotech do something? In my mind, biotech in general is on the earliest stages, right? Startup, early R&D, early to late R, and then into early D, right, into clinical. And in my experience so far, by and large, the folks that work in biotech do it for all the right reasons and are equally flummoxed by, why we get such a bad rap. But can biotech really help the perception of the industry that is driven largely by the public's understandable anger over commercialization of drugs? The honest answer, Matt, is I'm not sure. Not sure. That's not the realm in which we play.
Yeah, I just feel like, and this is a raw thought.
Please.
Like it's a raw thought, right? Like I just feel like so much of the positive news, so much of the excitement happens in biotech. And maybe it's a matter of you share the good news that's happening in early R&D and biotech, and there's such a dichotomy between that and the current standards of care that it just creates more ill will. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like it's just, I feel like, to your point, like I live in that bubble too. Like I live in this bubble where I talk to guys like you and women like you all day, every day. Yeah. And I'm like, where's the good news and the hard work and the altruism getting lost in the translation, but perhaps to your point, it's just too soon.
No, I think you're right. Cause even when we go out there and talk about the promise, I do wonder if people look at that and say, oh, that's just spin. That's just a way for us to buy the story.
Because my experiences with my loved ones and my own health have been, the same for the past 30 years at the point of care.
My loved one can't afford, like I was talking about with, putting a patient on a blood thinner. My loved one can't afford X medicine because the pharma companies price it too high. And the reality is so much more complicated than that. But to me, when a patient's day-to-day experience is difficulty affording their medicines, until we fix that, we're not going to be able to punch through that with what's really happening in biotech, which is truly groundbreaking and revolutionary science that will extend life.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. One last question for you, and then I will let you get on with your day. As I said, the physician turned founder turned biotech builder is always super interesting to me. You're a continuing your practice in the clinic and also leading a biotech, but that's more often than not a difficult transition for physicians and scientists to make. So if you were speaking specifically to MDs and scientists turn biotech builders or aspiring to, what would be your pithiest advice for those folks to I guess encourage them and inspire them along that transition?
There's not enough of us. I think back to my away medical rotation in Tanzania, where I would spend the day seeing children die of cerebral TB, something that doesn't even happen in our country, and spend my evenings reading Ayn Rand of all things.
Mm.
And what came together during that sort of dichotomous period of experiences during the day versus reading at night was the people that really change the world are the Howard Rourkes who know how to rivet and then go on to design buildings, or the Hank Reardons who know how to smelt and then build a successful business on breakthrough technology. We need more people who have their boots on the ground in medicine, who know how to rivet and smelt, but then move in to actually build the businesses that change the world. There's not enough of us. And I think that the industry would be better served by more of us making that, I wouldn't even say transition, but straddling the boundary between both practicing medicine, but also working in the wonderful business of making new drugs for patients.
Yeah. All right. I lied. One last question to follow up on that.
Please.
Where would you point those people to surround themselves with the right people to be equipped to not just rivet and smelt, but develop businesses, build businesses that then create medicine?
Yeah. I did it the hard way. I got lucky. I found people that believed in me. That doesn't always happen. There are ways to do it. The most tried and true way are going through consulting agencies like the McKinseys of the world and the Boston Consulting Groups, which are fine because you really do learn valuable lessons there.
Mm-hmm.
My only advice would be don't give up practicing along the way because you lose something if you do.
Yeah, very good. Well, it's been a real pleasure to talk with you, Rahul. I appreciate you taking the time with us. I think I really enjoyed our time. I hope we get to do it again. You actually mentioned maybe toward the back half of this year. So I'm going to hold you to that. Maybe towards the back half of the year, we'll have you back on for an update on what's going on at Tome.
I've enjoyed our conversations to date, and I would love to do it again later this year.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Take care, sir. Thank you.
That's Tome Biosciences President and CEO and Brigham Women's Hospital physician, Dr. Rahul Kakkar. I'm Matt Pillar, and you just listened to The Business of Biotech. We are produced by Life Science Connect and its community of websites and publications designed to help life science decision makers learn, solve, and source their way through the rigors of this dynamic industry.